Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Eline Versluis. I'm the manager of the Gender at the Center initiative at Untitled, and I will be your host for today. We're very happy to see all of you here today, and we're happy to see some of your names in the chat box already. We want to hear more from you, so please feel free to type your name in the chat box. Tell us a bit about the work you're doing and where you are calling in from. The title of today's webinar is Transforming Social Norms to End Child Marriage and Advance Girls' Education. It's co-hosted by Ungai and Girls Not Brides, and it's a side event to the GPE Global Education Summit. It's also part of the Ungai Learning Series. We all know that unequal social norms are at the very basis of harmful practices such as child marriage and girls' limited education opportunities. We also know that child marriage and girls' education are intimately linked. However, ending child marriage and transforming social norms are rarely explicit education goals. So that's why we are here today, to call for more investments in transforming social norms within our education investments, our programming, and our planning. And today we will be hearing from researchers, from program specialists, from civil society representatives, and from young feminists, and they will all be making the call for more investments in transforming gender norms, for more cross-sectoral collaboration, and for really putting gender transformative education at the top of our agenda. So we're very excited about this webinar today, but before going into the presentations, I would like to put out a question to all of you. If we are thinking about social norms within our very own contexts and societies, we would love to hear from you, from your specific context, how gender norms or how social norms are defining the expectations we have of women and girls. So please feel free to type into the chat box how within your own specific context, social norms are defining expectations of women and girls. Also, before going any further, I have some practical announcements to make to you. We have simultaneous interpretation available today in English, French, and Portuguese. And you can access that interpretation by clicking on the world sign at the bottom of your page, and you can choose the language you want to be following the webinar in. There's also presentations available in French and Portuguese, and we will share the links to those presentations in the chat box. There's also captions in English available, and you can access those by clicking on the link that will be shared in the chat box. And finally, of course, please do share any questions you have in the Q&A function that you also find at the bottom of your page. And please indicate the speaker you wish to address your question to, and the speaker will answer your question within the Q&A box as well. So now I'm very happy to pass the floor for our first speaker, Helen Grant, who is the UK Special Envoy for Girls' Education at the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and she will be sharing the opening remarks. Please, Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's lovely to be with you today, and again, thank you for inviting me to open this important discussion on child marriage and girls' education. As many of you will know, 2021 is a major year for the United Kingdom. We're presidents of the G7 and the COP26. We are co-hosting the Global Education Summit that actually kicks off next Wednesday in London. All of these are huge watershed moments with big opportunities to shine a spotlight on the importance of girls' education, how transformational it actually can be, but also on some of the barriers that do still exist. I'm hugely honoured to be the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education. My role is very much to champion his message that providing 12 years of quality education for every girl on the planet is one of the best ways of tackling many of the major issues facing the world today, like poverty, climate change, and inequality. Investing in girls' education is an absolute game changer. The child of a mother who can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5, twice as likely to go to school themselves, and 50% more likely to be immunised. We know too that girls who are educated are more able to choose if, when, and how many children they actually have. Girls' education is therefore vital for women and girls for their own self-empowerment, but it is also important in levelling up society, boosting incomes, and developing economies and nations. Even before COVID-19, the world was facing a learning crisis. Tragically, the pandemic has become one of the biggest educational disruptors in our history, affecting 1.6 learners at peak of the pandemic during 2020. Many of these children are girls. Many of them will never return to school or even start school, lowering their chances of future employment and decent livelihoods. Out-of-school girls, as we all know, are at greater risk of violence, sexual abuse, early marriage, forced marriage, FGM, human trafficking. All of this creating a very real risk of a lost generation of girls. So we must work hard and we must work together to prevent this from happening. A concerted international effort will certainly be key in achieving our ambitious new girls' education targets. 20 million more girls reading by the age of 10 and 40 million more girls in primary and secondary school in low and low to middle income countries by 2026. We must also work more closely in tackling the complex barriers that keep girls from getting to school and staying in school, which include harmful social norms and practices. In the UK, we are proud to have committed £38 million over 5 years to support international efforts to end child marriage. This funding has reached almost 8 million girls across 12 countries and almost 40 million community members. Through school initiatives and information sharing, attitudes towards child marriage are gradually changing. No girl should have her hopes and dreams dashed because she's been forced to marry too early or become a mother because of lack of family planning advice. In the UK, we are also proud to be global leaders in efforts to end violence against women and girls. I was a family lawyer for 23 years prior to entering politics, and I saw on a daily basis the devastating impact of gender-based violence. Violence against women and girls is a scourge. It crushes self-confidence and self-esteem, it wrecks families, it ruins lives, and we must eradicate it. Through our What Works to Prevent Violence programme, we've pioneered approaches worldwide that have actually demonstrated that violence is preventable. These approaches that engaged whole communities saw violence reduced by around 50%. Change doesn't have to take generations. It needs to happen now. And of course, we are doing it now. I also saw this for myself in Sierra Leone when I was there just a few weeks ago. I met with community leaders and listened to them passionately and persuasively inform their own communities about why child marriage is wrong. And I'm delighted that the second phase of the research programme that I mentioned earlier will invest another £67 million in continuing the research and scaling up the vital work. So we must continue to work together. We must shift the dial. Good progress has been made, but there is much, much more that we need to do. And I know the weight of the challenge with girls' education is very significant, but our ability to make change in the world, if we work together, should never be underestimated. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm sure you will have a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for these powerful opening remarks. It's really encouraging to see the UK stepping up and really committing to wanting to have 12 years of quality education for every girl in the planet, and also for acknowledging it that it's not only education we need to work on, but we need to work on those gender norms and on those harmful practices. Like you said, even in the UK, gender-based violence is still a big issue. So it's really encouraging to see the UK bringing that all together, and we're very excited about you being among us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kelly Jottebing. She's an independent research consultant, and she will share with us the results from a very fascinating research she conducted on social norms and girls' education in sub-Saharan Africa. This research was conducted for UNGAI within the framework of the Gender at the Center initiative. Please, Kelly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and lovely to be here this morning. Just for reference, the report that from this research, which would be impossible to present in totality in this short time frame, is the link to the full report is on the website, and it's in the chat, I believe. So if you're interested in learning more and reading more, you can find it there. I think the slides. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So as Aline had introduced, this was research that was conducted or basically commissioned in the context of the Gender at the Center initiative, which supports the leadership of ministries of education and other national actors to advance gender equality in education. And it's currently being implemented in 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I'll get to that in a second. But what I was trying to do was to help the Gender at the Center initiative review kind of the existing studies on gendered social norms in these countries and just more broadly to understand better how do they serve as barriers to girls' education. And in the Q&A, you can ask any questions that you would like that I can respond to afterwards. But I also would love to see examples of social norms that you have identified in your region or that you've observed in your region that serve as obstacles to girls' education. So as you're listening to me and as you're thinking about this, it would be great to list some of those in the Q&A, and I will get back to that towards the end of my intervention. But anyway, I was looking at the social norms that impede girls' education access and their ability to continue school in the 8 partner countries and tried to identify gaps in our understanding, because social norms seem to be the sticky spot where we get stuck and where progress in achieving equity in girls' education seems to be stuck. And then from this research and from identifying the gaps, to propose a research agenda. We can go to the next slide. So despite progress that we've seen in, as I mentioned, reducing gender disparities in education, the UNDP's Gender Inequality Index shows that gender equality has actually been slowing in recent years. So we made great strides, and now it's kind of getting stuck. And it seems that a lot of the reason for this are these deeply entrenched social norms that serve as obstacles to girls' education. And so I looked at the literature to see what sort of data we have as to what social norms are impeding girls' access to education in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Mauritania, Mali, Mozambique, Chad, Niger, and Burkina Faso, as well as what we know globally. And tried to identify some key areas where we need to know more, where we need to have a research agenda. Because the reality is oftentimes social norms are referenced in education sector plans and other sort of documents and programs that are trying to improve girls' access to education. But there's little done to actually address them. We can go to the next slide. And the reason why, the kind of findings that we saw when we were looking through the literature was that social norms that reinforce gender biases are extremely prevalent globally. They're reinforced from a very young age and deeply internalized by community members, including women and girls. Women and girls are often really not asked what kind of alternative futures to the status quo that they are observing and living in would look like. And these biases are taught and reinforced across societal structures, including at schools. These are places where social norms are produced and reproduced and reinforced as well. Now, education sectors and plans and priorities, I looked at those across these 8 countries anyway. Sometimes they mention social norms, but they rarely have activities in the sectoral strategies to address these specific social norms. And sometimes there's an unclear mandate as to who should be addressing them, because the actual norm itself and the types of intervention it would take to really address them oftentimes fall outside of the mandate of the Ministry of Education, which means that we need to involve other actors as well and think more broadly about things like child marriage as an education sector priority. And we really need to think about how to transform underlying structural contexts and focus on changing perceptions of what is condoned or disapproved in a social group, and really trying to influence alternative ways of thinking about what girls could and should be doing, and how education sector priorities or education sector plans and can involve the types of actors that can really help to address these barriers, recognizing that the expertise might not lie within the Ministry of Education, but it does lie within the country, and there are actors that we can pull on and identify. Next slide. So what to do after we've identified the different kinds of social norms is really, to me, one of the key takeaways of this research and of doing work in this area for a long time is that the list is long. There are a lot of social norms that impede girls' access to education and really that serve as continued kind of reinforcers of gendered inequality. We cannot address all of them at once. What I find, what I suggest from this research is that the education sector really look at the social norms that might be most directly affecting girls' education and identify 3 to 4, perhaps, that they would want to address within the education sector priorities or plans, and who they need to work with in order to address those. Some key ones that came up over and over in the literature review and from my own work in girls' education is early marriage, school-related gender-based violence, and the different forms of gender-based violence that can happen in school and serve as impediments to girls accessing quality education. Menstruation as well, and the ways in which we could make sure that girls, after they've reached puberty, don't suffer from a lot of absenteeism from school because of their menses. We need to, once we've identified the key social norms that we want to address, think about participatory techniques to really explore how they're produced and reproduced and identify the kind of people that need to engage, the people who are upholding those social norms, like teachers, school leadership, maybe. It could be unintentional, but really trying to identify who those people are and how we can engage them. Men's engagement is also very important, trying to identify within the groups of people who have power, including men, are there people who are kind of deviating from the norm, who are promoting girls' education already, who are challenging some of these social norms like early marriage or school-related gender-based violence, or access to pads or other types of resources that can help girls continue to attend school even when they're menstruating. And then another key recommendation from this research is that often most of the ministries of education have gender units. And I argue that they can be given a real power in this specific area to engage these different actors, research, and action. So really trying to empower these gender units, have them at the table, allow them to take a lead in identifying the key social norms that are impeding access in a specific country, and the different actors that can be engaged to challenge these social norms, and really building this ongoing kind of constant discussion and programming around breaking down these social norms in the context of girls' education programs. Because as we know, this is more than just putting up a billboard or handing out flyers. This kind of changing social norms really requires a lot of engagement at the community level, a lot of continued discussion, and sometimes challenging discussions to really try and help people to understand how these social norms are harmful, how breaking them down could create an alternative, better future for everybody. And the ways in which we could do this are possible, but we really need to think about things like early marriage, adolescence in general, menstruation, and school-related gender-based violence, among other things, as education sector priorities. I will stop there. And again, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A and I will try to respond to them. And then also the full report is available on the website. The link is in the chat. Thank you, Eileen, back to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This is an absolutely fascinating piece of research. And as you said, the report is available today. It's available on the website, and we'll also put the link in the chat box. I think this is so fascinating to see, and what struck me most is what you said about like social norms being so deeply entrenched and also being internalized by many of us, and that it's even produced and reproduced within the very education systems that we are working with. So I think it's all the more important, as you said, that education sector plans address transforming social norms. And as you mentioned, they are already referencing it, but there's not many strategies put in place to really address them. So I think your research really backs our plea today to start using our education sector policies and plans to tackle this issue of transforming social norms. Thank you so much. Our next speaker now is Mundia Situmbeko, the Africa Engagement Officer for Girls Not Brides, and she will present in Girls Not Brides Education Out Loud project in West Africa. Mundia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Before I go into the presentation, I would like to ask the audience a question that you can feel free to answer in the Q&A in the chat box during the presentation. So if you are from or work in the Western Central Africa context, would you share with us what initiatives concerning girls' education and or child marriage?
Excuse me, Mundia, sorry, could you speak a bit louder or a bit closer to the microphone? We're having trouble hearing you.
Yes, sure. No problem.
Thank you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, I think it's better now.
Okay, perfect. I was saying that just before I go into the presentation, I would like to ask a question to the audience that you can feel free to respond to in the chat box during the presentation. If you are from or work in the Western Central Africa context, would you share with us what initiatives concerning girls' education or child marriage have had a positive impact on girls in your communities? Initiatives or interventions in humanitarian context, particularly the COVID context, are most welcome. So I'll begin with the presentation. Next slide, please, Eileen. Just before I begin, I'll speak to you a little bit more about Girls Not Brides. Girls Not Brides is a global partnership of more than 1,500 civil society organizations from 100 countries across the globe. And as we celebrate our 10th anniversary this year, we're currently reflecting on what has been achieved since its birth in 2011 by the Elders, a group of independent global thinkers that work collaboratively on peace and human rights. The Secretariat, with staff based in London and regionally in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, work with member organizations based across the world through our partnership strategy. We work across thematic areas at global, regional, national, and community levels to end child marriage. And when you receive the presentation after the webinar, you'll be able to have access to the links above. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, Mundia. There's still a lot of people saying that they can't hear you very clearly. Okay. I don't know if you have an option to change something to your sound.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, maybe if you turn off your video, it might improve. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. So next slide, please, Eileen. on the project overview. Speaking on thematic areas, education is one of GMB's key thematic areas, as we strongly believe in ending child marriage through a cross-sectoral approach, which is very much rooted in our theory of change that you are able to access on our website. With this deliberate effort to address child marriage through education.
Mandia?
Yes?
I'm afraid everyone's saying, can everyone hear me clearly? Because if you can, I will take over because I think your volume's still very quiet.
Okay, how about now? I'm really close to the mic.
No, it's still very quiet, so I think I'll take over.
Okay.
I'm really sorry about that. So Mandia gave a brief introduction to Girls Not Brides, which is a global partnership to end child marriage. And the project that we're talking about today is based in West Africa and focusing on strengthening collective action to end child marriage, keep girls in school, and advance gender equality. And the project focuses on child marriage and girls' lack of access to quality education, bringing together actors working on those two issues. It focuses on West African countries, Francophone West African countries, particularly Burkina Faso and Niger, which, as you know, have some of the highest rates of child marriage and girls out of school. And the aim of the project is to establish a powerful cross-sector movement to defend girls' right to education and end child marriage. And so we're working very closely at the moment with coalitions in Burkina Faso and Niger, but we're also going to be engaging with education and child marriage coalitions working in other Francophone West African countries. So, for example, Benin, Senegal, Togo, Mali, other countries where Girls Not Brides is engaging with coalitions. Next slide, please. So the overall objective is to galvanise civil society organisations and actors working on education and child marriage, primarily in West Africa, but also engaging coalitions internationally to share learning and to strengthen collective action, collective advocacy for the implementation of laws, policies and programmes to improve girls' access and retention in education and contribute to ending child marriage. Next slide. Now, we've put the main project activities here. We'll be sharing the slides. You can download the slides, so I'm not going to go into every single activity here, but broadly, under Objective 1, we have a lot of activities at national level, both to build the institutional and advocacy capacities of the coalitions there, to bring together education and child marriage coalitions to identify joint advocacy priorities and to work together, to build youth activism skills, and so on. Then at the regional level, we're carrying out regional research, both on the impact of COVID-19 on adolescent girls, but also on kind of promising interventions by actors working on those issues in the region. We're bringing together actors in social media, through webinars, possibly through a face-to-face workshop if we get to that stage, to share learning and build understanding. We're also encouraging peer-to-peer learning through cross-country learning visits and through, and we're going to be carrying out some joint campaigning on the issues of education and child marriage. And finally, at the international level, we're going to be making sure that any learning that comes out of that project, this project, is shared with members, with Girls Not Brides members and others internationally. Next slide, please. So just to give you a brief overview of the situation in West Africa, around 41% of girls in West and Central Africa are married before the age of 18. And 6 out of the 10 countries with the highest prevalence of child marriage are in West and Central Africa. Next slide. Some of the key drivers in the region are discriminatory gender norms, and we've been talking about those in this webinar. Taboos around female sexuality and fear of adolescent pregnancy, limited access to sexual and reproductive health services and information, poverty and humanitarian crises, and barriers to girls' education, which means that girls are dropping out early and child marriage is kind of one of the only options left to them. Next slide, please. In terms of education, we know that around 28 million girls in West and Central Africa don't have access to education. And puberty and the transition to secondary school are the kind of key moments when we see the highest risk of school dropout. Around 70% of girls in West and Central Africa start primary school, but only 36% complete lower secondary school. Next slide. And in the region, we know that both COVID-19 and high levels of insecurity and conflict have an impact. So in the Sahel, even before COVID-19, there were estimated to be around 2,000 schools closed in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali due to conflict and insecurity. And as a result of COVID-19, we've seen further school closures, unequal access for girls to distance learning, and very high risks of girls never returning to school. And COVID-19 has brought, of course, a higher risk of child marriage. We know that depending on the context, child marriage can either be a cause or consequence of school dropout. So if where traditional gender norms prescribe child marriage, a girl may be taken out of school specifically in order to get married. On the other hand, if a girl has to leave school because of other reasons, then many parents will see child marriage as the only viable option left. Studies show that scenario B is the most frequent. So if parents feel that, family feel that there's an opportunity for a girl to continue school, then many of those parents are ready to delay their daughter's marriage so that can happen. Next slide, please. So some of the key actions we can take to help to keep girls in school. These might be, improving access, providing access to sexual and reproductive health information and services, to prevent adolescent pregnancy, to raise awareness about these issues, improve the access and quality to education, create a safe and gender-sensitive school environment, reduce the costs linked to education, and working with communities, teachers, sexual and reproductive health providers, and others to transform gender norms. And just to say very briefly, Girls Not Brides has recently produced an education brief, which is just about to go on our website. I think it should be going up this week in English, French, and Spanish. And that gives a kind of overview of some of our understanding, some of the connections, some of the links between child marriage and girls' education. So do take a look at our website for that education brief. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're doing as part of this project is looking at opportunities for regional partnerships and advocacy, so that we're not just bringing together education and child marriage coalitions within countries, but we're making those connections between coalitions across countries, and that we're working with and advocating to African Union, ECOWAS, and connecting with other groups such as the Genders at the Centre Initiative and Genie and so on. So we're really looking forward to working together on joint advocacy initiatives with countries working on this project. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Noélie in Burkina Faso, who will explain to you a little bit about the work that we're doing on the project there, and then Lydia in Niger.
Thank you so much, Emma and Mundia. Thank you so much. It's so interesting to see what you are doing in your project in West Africa. And we've seen that the situation in West Africa is really severe for girls. The numbers you've mentioned, 41% of girls married before the age of 18 and 28 million girls without access to education. So we've seen that there's really some work that needs to be done. It's absolutely encouraging and fascinating to see that you are actually making those connections between child marriage actors and education actors within the field. So that's absolutely the kind of projects and the kind of work we want to see moving forward. That's what we need, more cross-sectoral collaboration on these issues. So we're very curious to continue to follow that project, and we're hoping to hear more about it in the months to come. Thank you very much. I will now switch to French to introduce our two next speakers, who are civil society representatives from Girls Not Bride civil society coalitions in Burkina Faso and Niger. Donc, je passe maintenant au français pour introduire nos prochaines intervenantes, qui sont deux représentantes des coalitions de la société civile de filles pas épouses au Burkina Faso et au Niger. Noélie Sinard représente la CONAMEB au Burkina Faso et Lydia Ounon représente la plateforme pour mettre fin au mariage d'enfants au Niger. Je passe d'abord la parole à Noélie et ensuite à Lydia. Et on voudrait vous demander, puisqu'on est un peu en retard, d'être bref dans vos présentations. Merci beaucoup. Lydia, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Hélène. Je crois que c'est beaucoup plus. Merci beaucoup, Hélène. Je crois que c'est Noélie qui va prendre la parole au nom de la coalition contre le mariage d'enfants au Burkina Faso. Diapo. Diapo, s'il vous plaît. Alors, qui sommes-nous? La coalition contre le mariage d'enfants est une fêtière d'associations et d'ONG nationales et internationales qui œuvrent à la fin du mariage d'enfants au Burkina Faso. Elle a été créée en 2013, s'il vous plaît, et compte à ce jour 70 structures réparties au niveau national et international. On continue. Comme objectif global de la CONAMEB, c'est de promouvoir les droits des enfants et l'abandon du mariage d'enfants au Burkina Faso. Et nous avons développé deux grandes stratégies qui sont, s'il vous plaît, de développer un partenariat avec les ministères en charge de la santé et de la justice, des droits humains, le ministère de la Femme et celui de l'Éducation. Nous avons également développé une autre stratégie qui est de travailler avec les médias. On continue. Qui est de travailler avec les médias, les leaders coutumiers et religieux en vue d'accompagner la mise en œuvre des activités de la coalition. Diapo. Alors, le contexte du mariage d'enfants au Burkina Faso. Il faut dire que le Burkina fait partie des 10 premiers pays africains les plus affectés par le mariage d'enfants, avec une prédominance du mariage coutumier, religieux ou des unions libres. Dans le système traditionnel au Burkina Faso, le mariage est un acte social, une affaire de famille. C'est donc la famille qui choisit le conjoint de la fille au nom de la tradition. Et selon l'UNICEF, 10% des femmes sont mariées avant l'âge de 15 ans et 52% des femmes avant l'âge de 18 ans. Il y a une fille sur deux qui sont mariées donc avant 18 ans au Burkina Faso. Diapo. Au sujet des normes sociales, il faut dire que les causes sous-jacentes du mariage d'enfants et la déscolarisation des filles au Burkina Faso sont entre autres les inégalités du genre à tous les niveaux. Et donc, il y a une étude qui a été réalisée en 2018 qui, voilà, présente un peu les inégalités à tous les niveaux. Il y a la pauvreté. Il y a également le contexte sécuritaire et les attaques contre les écoles qui ont entraîné les parents à devenir plus protecteurs envers leurs filles en raison des risques pour la sécurité et décident souvent de confiner les filles à la maison. Il y a également les pratiques traditionnelles néfastes qui sont le don de la fille. Donc, il s'agit ici de donner la fille pour mariage à une famille dans le but de renforcer les liens entre deux familles ou deux communautés. Il faut dire que cette pratique est très courante au Burkina Faso. Il y a le lito, qui est l'échange ou le mariage de filles entre deux familles. Il y a également le porlenga, qui veut dire donner en fait la sœur, une sœur de la nouvelle épouse à son époux ou à un membre de la famille de l'époux en vue de renforcer encore les liens entre les familles. Voilà, il faut dire que cette pratique est courante dans certains groupes ethniques. Il y a le rapt, qui est une pratique d'enlèvement de la fille et de force sur le chemin de l'école sans son consentement. À ce niveau, les jeunes filles qui sont les plus exposées sont les filles de 14 à 16 ans et beaucoup plus les filles qui ne sont pas scolarisées. Et le rapt est une pratique vraiment courante au Burkina Faso et dans bon nombre de communautés. Diapo. Diapo. Lien entre mariage d'enfants, éducation et impact de la COVID-19. Il faut dire que le Burkina Faso subit une situation d'insécurité et cela a pour conséquence la fermeture de beaucoup d'écoles, beaucoup de déplacés internes. Nous avons beaucoup de déplacés internes au Burkina Faso et le taux d'abandon scolaire est donc beaucoup plus grand dans les zones d'insécurité. Et selon une étude de l'UNICEF, 5 millions d'enfants sont affectés par la fermeture des écoles et 13% des écoles avaient fermé avant même la COVID-19 en raison de l'insécurité. Et la COVID-19 a entraîné la fermeture de tous les établissements durant une bonne partie de l'année scolaire en 2020. Donc, cette situation a conduit et pourrait encore conduire au mariage d'enfants, aux grossesses précoces et à toutes les pires formes et autres types de violences faites aux filles et aux femmes. Diapo. Alors, face à tout cela, nous lançons un appel qui est de développer des approches innovantes pour renforcer les initiatives existantes en vue d'accompagner les parents et filles en situation de vulnérabilité. Voilà, comme je le disais, nous avons des personnes déplacées et c'est une situation qui expose davantage les jeunes filles au mariage d'enfants et à toutes sortes de violences. De sécurité pour l'apprentissage des jeunes et enfants. Il faudrait également développer des mécanismes d'accompagnement des parents et jeunes filles non scolarisées. Il faudrait renforcer des actions de sensibilisation et de plaidoyer auprès des décideurs et leaders. Et je crois que le projet EOL est la bienvenue à ce niveau parce que c'est un projet qui va permettre non seulement de renforcer les actions de plaidoyer au niveau national, mais également au niveau sous-régional et international, en vue de l'abandon de toutes les pratiques, favoriser l'accès et le maintien des filles à l'école. Il faudra également développer le plaidoyer auprès de tous les acteurs, auprès des acteurs des coalitions pour la fin du mariage d'enfants et des coalitions de l'éducation. Sur ce, je vous remercie et je laisse la parole à Lydia pour présenter un peu les actions du Niger. Merci.
Merci, Noélie. Pour ce qui concerne le Niger a une plateforme pour mettre fin au mariage des enfants. Cette plateforme existe depuis quelques années. Diapo. Diapo, s'il vous plaît. La plateforme vers la fin du mariage des enfants est une coalition stratégique entre plusieurs partenaires. L'objectif de cette plateforme est de coordonner les efforts de plaidoyer pour mettre fin au mariage des enfants au Niger. Elle est composée ainsi d'organisations du système des Nations Unies, d'organisations internationales telles que Save the Children, Care International et World Vision, et de plus de 60 organisations de la société civile nationale. Diapo, s'il vous plaît. Diapo. Quel est le contexte du Niger? Comme vous le savez tous, dans le monde entier, le Niger a le plus fort taux de prévalence de mariage précoce, avec 77% des filles mariées avant l'âge de 18 ans. Le paradoxe, c'est qu'au Niger, le Code civil fixe le mariage à 15 ans, qui n'est déjà pas l'âge auquel la fille est mature pour se marier, et cette disposition n'est même pas respectée. Chaque jour, 256 filles de 15 à 19 ans mettent au monde un bébé et 28 filles de 12 à 14 ans. Au Niger, l'âge médian du mariage précoce est de 15 ans et demi pour les femmes sans aucune éducation et de près de 17 ans pour celles qui ont suivi un enseignement primaire et de 21 ans pour les femmes ayant suivi un enseignement secondaire et primaire. Un enseignement secondaire et supérieur, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Diapo. Diapo, s'il vous plaît. Tout à l'heure, l'une des présentatrices a parlé des normes sociales. Au Niger, les normes sociales qui sont des obstacles pour le mariage des enfants, nous avons certaines causes sous-jacentes qui sont le rejet de la non-conformité à la communauté, la stigmatisation autour de la virginité, la phobie des grossesses précoces. Les filles célibataires de plus de 15 ans sont stigmatisées et sont appelées en langue Hausa Santo, ce qui veut dire périmée. Et au Niger, le mariage est célébré avec un mélange de coutumes et d'interprétations équivoques de l'islam. Le mariage des enfants présuppose la non-reconnaissance de l'éducation formelle pour les filles. La demande de scolarisation est plus élevée pour les garçons que pour les filles, étant donné le coût d'opportunité pour élever les filles. Diapo, s'il vous plaît. Diapo. Quels sont les liens entre le mariage des enfants, l'éducation des filles et l'impact de la COVID-19 au Niger? Comme tous les pays du monde, le Covid a eu beaucoup d'impact aussi au Niger et cela s'est ressenti par un fort abandon scolaire des filles après l'ouverture des écoles. Les filles n'avaient plus des amis dans les réseaux de soutien et cela a augmenté la pauvreté, surtout en milieu rural. Les filles qui ont été mariées sont beaucoup moins susceptibles d'avoir reçu une éducation, environ 40%, par rapport aux filles qui n'ont jamais été mariées, près de 72%. Les filles qui ont été mariées sont beaucoup plus susceptibles d'être analphabètes, près de 78%, que les filles qui n'ont jamais été mariées, près de 44%. Diapo, s'il vous plaît.
Excusez-moi, Lydia, si vous pourriez résumer, parce qu'il nous reste 1 minute,
oui,
je pense.
Oui, j'ai fini. J'ai juste les recommandations et l'appel à l'action. Donc, comme recommandation forte, c'est vraiment fournir des mesures de protection sociale exhaustives aux familles et l'ouverture des écoles. Il faudra aussi mettre en place des législations et des politiques efficaces qui vont garantir l'accès aux services sanitaires et sociaux des filles, surtout au niveau de la santé sexuelle et reproductive. Merci beaucoup. Je suis en fin de ma présentation. Merci, Eline.
Merci beaucoup, Lydia. Merci beaucoup, Noélie, pour ces présentations tout à fait intéressantes. C'est vrai que vous travaillez dans un contexte très difficile où il y a des normes traditionnelles, on l'a vu, qui sont très sévères dans les sociétés, qui sont même encore aggravées par le contexte de sécurité. Mais c'est aussi tout à fait encourageant de voir que vous avez des approches innovatrices et des recommandations très concrètes pour transformer ces normes sociales. Donc, merci beaucoup pour ces présentations tout à fait intéressantes. I will now switch back to English for our next speakers, who are two very interesting young people. The first one is Wadi Benhirki. He's a gender equality advocate from Nigeria, and Hawa Yoki, a member of the Generation Equality Youth Task Force and founder of Africa Girls Empathy in Sierra Leone. We will go first to Wadi and then to Hawa. Wadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. As we all know, gender equality and girl-child education are not privileges, but they are rights that everybody deserves, to have access to. Using my personal experience being from northern Nigeria, I've seen how terrorism, extreme poverty, illiteracy, and social norms have deprived many young girls, millions of young girls, from accessing education. But because of that right that my parents gave to me, I'm able to pursue and lead a fulfilling life, which I believe many girls, all girls rather around the world, deserve that right. We know that child marriage does a lot of harm, to girls. It truncates their destiny, and they're likely to have children who will also not be educated, and you end up seeing them engaging in social vices. So it's just, the ripple effect is a lot. And so we know that we all have roles to play. For example, the COVID-19 showed us the need for urgent action. It took us many steps aback, but if we come together as stakeholders, both at the local and international levels, I believe that there's a lot of progress that will be made. So here are a few recommendations that I have. The first recommendation is to fund security. We've heard on the news and in our countries how many girls are abducted from school. We've heard of the Chibok girls, Dapchi girls, and girls all around African countries. So security should be funded so that when they go to school, they are sure that they will return back home safely. The second will be creation of safe spaces and emergency centers. There are a lot of harms, gender-based violence, and many issues that girls go through. So if there are safe spaces where they could report these issues, safe spaces where they will have access to therapists, psychologists, and many other people, I believe that their education, they will do much better in school when they have safe spaces and emergency centers. Another thing I would say is to bring an end to period poverty. We know how many girls, because they cannot afford, sanitary pads, tampons, they miss out on school every single month. But if we bring an end to period poverty, we will see that girls will not miss out on school anymore, and they will be able to pursue their dreams, their goals, and their aspirations. The fourth will be to work with people at all levels, even community gatekeepers and organizations at grassroots level. These people are very much involved. They are very knowledgeable, and they are in those communities where all these issues are happening. So when we work with them directly, I believe that we'll be able to monitor and evaluate progress better. And even our intervention plans will see a lot of success. And lastly, I would say that age consent should be imposed in all countries to 18. We have countries where, at 11, you see that age consent is 11. This shouldn't be the case. So if age consent is made 18, I believe that all girls will have access to education, not just at primary or secondary levels, but if possible, even university levels. And people should be sanctioned and punished if they go against the laws in those countries. And so these are my few recommendations. Lastly, I'll say that we all have vital roles to play to ensure that gender equality is achieved and to bring about a fairer, better, safer, and more sustainable world. Thank you very much for having me. I will now pass over to my colleague, Hawa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wadi. I think that is very inspirational. Thank you very, very much. So my name is Hawayoki and I'm from Sierra Leone. And I would really, before I start, I really want to ask you if you can be able to have a conversation in the chat box and to answer how the COVID-19 has really impacted the lives of girls in your country. Please feel free to do that. So we all know that the COVID-19 has really changed the lives of how we do things and has really impacted us. Take Sierra Leone, for example. We have 800,000 girls, according to UNICEF, who are into child marriages. And prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of activists. We had a lot of civil society movements that were engaged in fighting, in advocating for girls. But then, when we had the pandemic, we saw that the number of people that were advocating for girls in school, the number of civil society that were advocating for girls to have access to education, for girls to have access to clean menstrual products, all these things before the pandemic were accessible to girls. But then when we had the pandemic, but then when we had the pandemic, we saw that all the focus shifted towards ending the pandemic, and because of this, we saw a number of girls that dropped out of school. We saw a number of girls that were into teenage pregnancy. Take Sierra Leone, for example. So my work basically is included in the rural communities, and we saw that mothers or parents prefer to send the girls into early marriage instead of sending them to school. This was because there were no schools were open, and because of this, we saw that the number increased. And so, for me, I think it's very important for us to send our girls to school because it leverages the opportunities for us to be able to focus on things that are affecting them. And so I put down a few recommendations. One of the things that we really need to do is we need to strengthen laws. We know that there are existing laws that are actually focusing on teenage pregnancy, that are actually focusing on dropout. Take Sierra Leone, for example, again. There is a law that says when a child is raped, the perpetrator needs to go to jail. But then we are seeing a high number of cases of rape. Why? Because those laws that are in existence are not being enforced. So we really need to enforce these laws. We really need to ensure that these laws are strengthened. We really need to ensure that these laws will not be compromised. And another recommendations I really want to put out there is for leaders to hold themselves accountable. We have seen a lot of times when leaders are running for political spaces, when they come, they make promises that, when I'm sitting at this political table, I will ensure that girls will be sent to school. I will ensure that the number of rape cases will be reduced, or I will ensure that these laws will be reformed. These laws will be enforced. But the moment they take these places, they totally forget about the promises that I've made, that they made. So it is really important for them to hold themselves accountable, and so that whatever they say pertaining girls' education, whatever they say pertaining girls, they will be able to accomplish it. And lastly, to invest in education. I think one of the most important things is for government or for our leaders to be able to invest in education. The good thing that happens for Sierra Leone is we have out of our education, out of our national budget, 2% of this is being shifted towards education. And not only that, and these 20% is really focusing on girls. And because of this, now that it's free, now that there are free education, the country has free education, girls are now the spaces or the opportunities, and opportunities are now available for girls to go to school. So we really need to ensure that the opportunities that the opportunities that are there, that there should be more investment in education so that girls can be able to have access to these educations. And lastly, for us, we really need for us as as young people, we need to take up that role to ensure that we advocate to our parents, we advocate to our leaders, we advocate to our community people. We tell them the importance of sending girls to school. We tell them the importance of ending child marriage. We tell them the importance of reporting when there is a case of rape. We tell them the importance of holding themselves accountable. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wadi and Hawa. You're such an inspiration to all of us, and it's really great to hear about the very important work that you're doing within your countries and your communities. We've taken note of your very useful and actionable recommendations, and I think we can all commit to amplifying those recommendations, amplifying your voices in the work we are doing, and we look forward to hearing much more from you. Thank you so much. Apologies for running a bit over time. We will try to be quick. So for the next presentation, I would like to present very briefly to you what UNGAI and what the Gender at the Center initiative is doing to transform social norms. Next slide, please. So as Kelly already introduced, the Gender at the Center initiative is a multi-stakeholder initiative that aims at promoting gender equality in and through education in 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And what is interesting is that it's actually a partnership between ministries of education, civil society, donors, and multilateral agencies. And it was launched in 2019 by the G7 Ministers of Education and Development. It is coordinated by UNGAI and by UNESCO IEP. Next slide, please. It is rooted in gender responsive education sector planning, but I won't go into detail here. So next slide, please. So what the GCI is doing to transform gender norms is actually working on 2 levels. We're working within the communities, and we're also working within the governments. And within the communities, you've already been able to listen to Kelly's presentation on how we've conducted the research on social norms within those 8 countries. But what is very interesting also is that we're working with a consortium of civil society organizations who work with young feminist activists and community leaders to really catalyze a dialogue on gender norms and on promoting more equal chances to education. So they're really trying to open up a dialogue within the communities on what gender norms are doing and how we can transform them. And then the second area is also very interesting. That's really working within governments, because we know that governments are actually a reflection of our society. So the same social norms that we will be finding within the society, we find within the governments. And it's sometimes these same social norms that put barriers towards really putting in place gender transformative education sector plans. So we're planning on doing a research on how these gender norms and how these institutional cultures work within governments. We'll also be providing a course on transformative leadership for ministry staff to really question their own gender biases and really trying to transform gender norms from within. And thirdly, we're promoting cross-sectoral collaboration between ministries to really continue to work on addressing those issues that are embedded in unequal gender norms, such as child marriage, adolescent pregnancy, and school-related gender-based violence. So that's in a very brief nutshell what we are doing within the Gender at the Center initiative. But please feel free to reach out if you have more questions, and we're very excited to keep you informed in the coming months about the progress of this initiative. Thank you very much. And now we all know that none of this would be happening if we don't have gender responsive costing and budgeting in place as well. So we're very happy to introduce our next speaker, Jorge Ubalde Colin, who is education specialist at the Global Partnership for Education, and who can tell us more about this issue. Please, Jorge, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the presentation. I think we have some slides. And the slides I'm going to be discussing basically costing and financing in education and how this relates to child marriage, social norms, and some of the emerging evidence on the interventions that are effective to prevent child marriage. Next slide, please. As our discussions have presented, and I will not go too much into this, child marriage is prevalent around the world. It inflicts a damage on 100 million girls expected to get married before the age of 18 in the next decade. So it's not a small problem. Its prevalence is decreasing, but because the population size is growing and because we have maybe even an increase due to COVID, this remains a very, very relevant issue. Next slide, please. Preventing child marriage can leverage actually a multidimensional approach. So on the one hand, we have empowerment, individual skills and support, and all the work that we can do to support the individual and to support the self-acknowledgement of the individual against child marriage. And this includes both girls and boys, and men and women. The second is a community, so a community approach to engage social norms at a social level. Schooling, meaning keeping girls in school for a longer period of time, that on the one hand prevents the act of marriage, and on the other hand is also changing social norms in the long term. And finally, economic incentives. So in some cases, this might be seen as specific bursaries associated to not getting married, or economic incentives to stay in school, and indirectly preventing child marriage through that. Next slide, please. In a comprehensive literature review, and just for you to know, these slides are going to be made public with the references made public. But so in this comprehensive literature review, what was found is that empowerment is actually one of the most successful interventions in terms of decreasing the proportion of child marriage among participants in the program, followed by schooling, economic incentives, and lastly, community programs that look at community engagement. And this is actually quite telling about some elements that we might be missing in terms of approaching the issue of social norms towards precluding child marriage, and the value of supporting girls directly and supporting the individuals directly in terms of empowering them to take their decisions. Next slide, please. Now, costing programs remains a very important challenge. So while in the previous slide I mentioned some elements about effectiveness, we still have very many questions about how much these programs cost. And this is mainly because, well, a lot of the programs reflect policy changes or might require policy changes, which are in themselves very difficult to cost. How can you cost the time, let's say, that very different actors take to engage on the policy discussion? How are this large set of ingredients, from volunteers to materials to radio shows, are going to be costed, and how we can keep track and monetize this large amount of time dedicated to the changing of social norms? This is all going to be very important for us to understand how much effort we're putting into changing the social norms, and how financing can affect this process, right? And now, if we had the cost and effectiveness, we actually face also a series of limitations, or some of them by design, some of them by the lack of data, which is external validity. So how do we bring evidence from other contexts? And second, we are limiting ourselves to one outcome. So when we talk about changing social norms, for example, we might be looking at benefits in preventing child marriage, in increasing education, in some health outcomes. So how can we bring all this together into the same assessment? Next slide, please. And some of these first preliminary assessments by UNSPA, the United Nations Population Fund, place the required funding towards the elimination of child marriage at $35 billion. This is quite a hefty sum, and it really reflects the strong work that is required to empower women, to bring these girls and young women to education, and the work needed to influence social norms. If we do the math, in terms of this 35 billion, how many cases are being prevented, this comes up to about $600 per case averted, which is on some levels. Let's say if we think only about the financing and the cost, this may seem quite high. Next slide. However, if we think about the benefits that this could bring to the communities, to the individuals, and to the countries themselves, we're talking about almost in the order of 4 trillion in global GDP. So if we do the assessment of how much would it cost, how much it might yield, this is around 111 times return. Not 111%, 111 times. So these are huge, potentially huge benefits for individuals and nations in terms of eliminating child marriage. Now, this means that we need to understand and support and finance education as a key driver to eliminate child marriage. We have to include gender-responsive public expenditure management in education as a lever for the allocation of resources. And what gender-responsive public expenditure management is telling us is basically assess the impact that public expenditure is going to have on men and women, or on girls and boys separately, or what are the differential impacts that might take place. And this is actually going to help us put the resources, or for example, as a means to, for example, getting towards gender equality. And last but not least, we truly need more information on the cost effectiveness of programs that are looking at preventing child marriage and at changing social norms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jorge. This is absolutely important for us to keep in mind when we are advocating for including transforming social norms in our education policies and programs. Really interesting to see that there's still a lot of challenges in costing and in measuring the cost effectiveness of programs, but also encouraging to hear your calculation of the immense benefits that we could have from ending child marriage. It's that figure keeps in my mind that it's on 111 times the costs. So the benefits are 111 times the costs of ending child marriage. So let's keep that figure in mind and have it in mind for our advocacy. Thank you so much. I will now switch to French to introduce our final speaker, and thank you so much for bearing with us in spite of the overtime. Notre dernier intervenant est Hélène Ferrer, chef du pôle genre, éducation, population et jeunesse de la ministère de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères de la France. Et Hélène clôturera cette session par quelques remarques finales. Hélène, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Eline. Bonjour à toutes et tous. C'est un vrai plaisir et un honneur de pouvoir clôturer ce webinaire au nom du ministère de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères. Bien sûr, je vais commencer par remercier Ungai et Girls Not Brides pour l'organisation de cet échange vraiment passionnant et nécessaire qui a, je crois, vraiment bien mis en lumière le lien entre l'éducation d'une part et la lutte contre les mariages d'enfants d'autre part et plus largement la transformation des normes sociales qui pèsent encore très lourdement sur les filles et les femmes partout dans le monde. Cet échange a aussi été l'occasion de donner la parole à des acteurs qui agissent au plus près des réalités du terrain et d'illustrer le sujet par des données, des exemples, des recommandations vraiment très concrètes. Merci beaucoup à tous les intervenants. Je pense qu'il a montré aussi que les enjeux liés aux normes sociales et aux normes de genre en particulier concernent absolument tous les acteurs, qu'il faut agir à la fois de manière simultanée à tous les niveaux pour transformer les représentations, à la fois au niveau institutionnel et politique, mais aussi celui des acteurs locaux, de la société civile, en passant par les médias, bien entendu, les leaders d'opinion, les acteurs de la recherche, et à tous ces échelons, en intégrant bien sûr les hommes dans une perspective de genre équilibrée. Et je remarque en jetant un œil à la liste des participants, mais aussi des panélistes aujourd'hui, que finalement, heureusement que Jorge Ubaldo est parmi nous, parce que nous sommes voilà, énormément de femmes aujourd'hui autour de la table virtuelle. Je ne reviendrai pas sur les conséquences de la pandémie de Covid-19 qui ont été largement évoquées, qui nous montrent que, comme pour les épidémies passées, qui nous ont apporté des enseignements, les filles, les femmes sont les premières victimes collatérales de la crise, et que pour nombre de jeunes filles, la fermeture des établissements scolaires rime avec déscolarisation durable lorsqu'elles sont appelées à d'autres tâches, d'autres activités que celles de se consacrer à leur éducation, malheureusement. Et indépendamment de cette crise, nous savons que l'éducation des filles fait encore face à de nombreux obstacles. Beaucoup d'exemples ont été évoqués concernant le continent africain. Et pour changer un peu de géographie, je voudrais aussi évoquer, parmi d'autres, l'exemple de l'Afghanistan, où la situation politique, sécuritaire actuelle et l'évolution dramatique au cours des derniers mois, des dernières semaines, laisse entrevoir de plus en plus de risques pour l'avenir des jeunes générations et des jeunes filles en particulier. Un mot rapide pour faire référence à l'agenda international. Nous sommes à mi-chemin entre deux temps forts pour les sujets qui nous intéressent aujourd'hui. Il y a quelques semaines se tenait à Paris le Forum Génération Égalité, qui a été un moment important de mobilisation internationale pour les droits des femmes et des filles. Et comme aujourd'hui, à l'occasion du forum, de nombreuses jeunes activistes féministes du continent africain, mais aussi d'Amérique latine, je me souviens, ont pris la parole pour évoquer ces normes sociales qui pèsent sur les femmes et défendre leurs droits, le droit fondamental à l'éducation en particulier. Et j'ai encore en mémoire des prises de parole vraiment très inspirantes et très puissantes. Et puis, dans quelques jours, s'ouvre le sommet global pour l'éducation avec la conférence de reconstitution des ressources du partenariat mondial pour l'éducation. L'événement d'aujourd'hui, ce webinaire, s'inscrit dans cet agenda. Nous sommes, la France, en tant que bailleur du partenariat mondial pour l'éducation, vraiment satisfait de voir que l'égalité de genre fait partie des thématiques prioritaires du partenariat et nous aurons à cœur de continuer à l'accompagner pour faire encore davantage sur ce sujet. Donc le moment a vraiment été bien choisi par Unguy et Girls Not Bright pour insister sur cette thématique aujourd'hui, promouvoir l'égalité de genre et susciter cet échange autour des droits des filles et des adolescentes aujourd'hui. Je voudrais souligner le fait que la France croit beaucoup à l'initiative Priorité à l'égalité, Gender at the Center en anglais, qui est portée par Unguy, par l'Institut international pour la planification de l'éducation et par l'ensemble des partenaires de l'Alliance GCI. Merci beaucoup de l'avoir présenté en détail aujourd'hui. C'est vraiment, nous le pensons, une initiative qui cherche à initier des progrès structurels et pérennes au sein des systèmes et des politiques éducatives. Et c'est pourquoi nous la soutenons activement et nous continuerons à le faire à l'avenir. Nous croyons aussi beaucoup à l'éducation en dehors de l'école, l'éducation informelle et aux actions portées par les ONG, les acteurs communautaires, les leaders de la jeune génération et plus globalement par l'ensemble de la société civile qui favorisent l'apprentissage de compétences non traditionnelles et qui font évoluer les représentations et les normes sociales aussi de manière complémentaire à ce qui peut être fait au sein des établissements scolaires. Voilà, c'est pourquoi le ministère de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères tient à soutenir chaque année un certain nombre d'initiatives issues de la société civile. Et nous allons encore renforcer cette dimension, notamment à travers le fonds de soutien pour les organisations féministes qui a été créé il y a maintenant 1 an et à travers lequel nous cherchons à appuyer vraiment directement des acteurs locaux dans les pays partenaires et pour soutenir leurs actions de terrain. Voilà, je terminerai en disant qu'il est très important et cela fait écho à la dernière présentation du partenariat mondial pour l'éducation, de vraiment mettre en valeur les bénéfices de l'éducation des filles pour l'ensemble des sociétés à la fois en termes de cohésion sociale, de développement économique ou lorsqu'on se place du point de vue de la lutte contre les changements climatiques et de l'adaptation au changement climatique. Donc toujours en gardant une approche contextualisée au plus près des réalités des différents pays pour proposer des approches qui parlent aux acteurs locaux. Il faut vraiment agir aussi sur ce registre en mettant en avant les bénéfices pour l'ensemble de la société qu'apporte l'éducation des filles. Voilà. Mon dernier mot sera pour remercier encore une fois Untitled et Girls Not Brides pour ce webinaire qui nous a aidé, je crois, à identifier la variété des leviers pour promouvoir le droit à l'éducation, lutter contre les normes et les pratiques sociales et de genre néfastes et sur lesquelles il est important d'agir simultanément en impliquant tous les acteurs concernés. Voilà, vous pouvez compter sur la France avec l'ensemble de ses partenaires et de tous les acteurs impliqués pour continuer ce combat. Merci à toutes et tous.
Merci beaucoup Hélène pour ces mots finaux tout à fait inspirants et merci à la France pour son engagement continu à la lutte pour l'égalité de genre. Merci, c'est la fin de ce webinaire. Merci à tous les intervenants. Merci à vous tous d'avoir participé. Vous trouverez l'enregistrement de ce webinaire, toutes les présentations et toutes les ressources partagées dans le chat box. On espère que vous avez bien aimé ce webinaire et on espère vous voir bientôt dans d'autres conversations. Merci beaucoup. Bon après-midi et bonne soirée à vous tous. Au revoir.
Recording stopped.
you.